Welcome to today's webinar on common mistakes when deploying Oracle E-Business Suite to the Internet. My name is Phil Ryman. I'm the Director of Business Development at Integrigy, and I'll be the moderator for this e-learning session. Speaker today is Steve Coast. Steve is the Chief Technology Officer and founder of Integrigy Corporation. He's been working with Oracle products since 1994. For the past 12 years, Steve has focused on the security and auditing aspects of the Oracle E-Business Suite and the Oracle database, and has written and presented on these topics at various national and regional conferences, including OAUG, IOUG, and the National Collaborative Conferences, which again we'll be at again. We will be there again this year. So I'll now turn it over to Steve.
Thanks so much, Phil. Today we're going to be talking about if you're running Oracle E-Business Suite modules such as iSupplier, iStore, iRecruitment, iSupport on the internet, what mistakes do we often see during Integrigy security assessments of clients? Common mistakes, things that are not secure that should be when you're deploying this large, complex beast of an application to the internet. And so we'll go through a number of different scenarios. So why might you be insecure? What mistakes might you have made that you may not know about? You may know about some of them, like not applying security patches, but there's a number of other areas within the configuration that can be very problematic, and we find quite often in our security assessments. Before we started, a quick background about Integrigy. Integrigy was founded in 2001 by former Big Six consultants who specialized in Oracle E-Business Suite and other ERP applications. And we have two sides to our business. We do have a product side. We have a product called AppSentry that will actually scan an Oracle E-Business Suite environment, the entire technology stack. So we look at the application server, and database to find misconfigurations, vulnerabilities, and other things, and other security issues in the application. And then we have a product called AppDefend, which is an enterprise application firewall for the E-Business Suite, which will actually protect a lot of the security issues that we're going to talk about today. A lot of this presentation today is based off of our services that we work directly with clients, helping them secure their E-Business Suite environments, especially when deploying to the internet. And so a lot of the information that we've compiled here is based on those assessments, what we've found at clients, real-life environments, and why we found that they've been insecure. And then finally, we have an internal research team that's very dedicated to finding security vulnerabilities and helping our clients protect E-Business Suite when deploying internally, deploying on the internet. It's a very large, complex application, and we're here to help. A lot of our information is published on Integrigy.com, is freely available. So enough about Integrigy. Let's start talking about Oracle E-Business Suite when you're deploying it to the internet. And we'll start off with a brief overview of kind of the internet architecture for E-Business Suite. Then specifically start talking about some of the DMZ configuration and some of the issues there, about critical patch updates within the E-Business Suite, and then finally network encryption. So let's get started and talk about the E-Business Suite configuration. So when I use the word DMZ, that stands for Dematerialized Zone. And that's basically just a security parlance for, well, you're deploying it to the internet and you have this special area in your network that's accessible from the internet but does not necessarily access your full internal network. So a lot of security professionals will put in a DMZ segment within your network to help protect these type of resources. So if you are deploying E-Business Suite to the internet, your application server that's external should be deployed in the DMZ. Fundamentally, there are some significant flaws within the Oracle E-Business Suite and why it is so problematic to deploy to the internet. The first is when you install the application, you get all modules. So everyone on the call today running Oracle E-Business Suite, you're running financials, HR, CRM, Oracle Student System, manufacturing. All those modules are there. Even if you've not installed them, licensed them, or configured them, because the application is so highly integrated internally, all those modules are there. All the code is there. There is no option to start just removing Oracle Student System from the application. The code is there. It may not work, it may not be usable, but unfortunately a lot of the security vulnerabilities that are found, even if the module is not configured or licensed, the security vulnerability is still fully exploitable. So the key here is you've got 20,000 web pages. So if you just go pop on an E-Business Suite application server on the internet, there's over 20,000 web pages fully accessible. Even if you're just running a module like iSupplier, which is only about 4 or 5 web pages, you've got 20,000 running. So the application is very big, very complex, and a huge surface area. And this becomes very problematic because if there's security vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, diagnostic pages, all kinds of issues there, they are fully exploitable in a default configuration if you don't spend a lot of time to lock this down. Even more problematic is now any of those web pages, when they connect to the database in the back end, they're using a single apps account. So any security vulnerabilities such as SQL injection, which allow me to modify queries running in the database, are fully exploitable on the internet, and I can basically start pulling back your HR data. There's no internal controls within the application. So even if I'm finding a security vulnerability in a module like iSupplier, if I can find a SQL injection vulnerability, and we'll talk about that later, I can start pulling back HR data, financial data, any data in the application because there's no internal controls. So again, this is a very complex application, but it's also not very well designed from a security perspective to be put on the internet. And a lot of what we'll talk about is how to overcome these flaws and the mistakes people try to make when they're trying to overcome these flaws, or they don't even realize this is an issue and they haven't properly configured it in the first place. This diagram here is for Oracle EBS Suite 12.0, 12.1. So again, about 20,000 web pages here. The screen did change, so now this is actually Oracle EBS Suite 12.2. The number of pages have changed slightly. The ratios of pages of OA framework pages to Java server pages is slightly different. Oracle has also made a change in 12.2 to now incorporate WebLogic. But again, even if you're running 12.2, the same issues apply to any version of Oracle Business Suite. Again, the screen changed again here, and now we're going to talk about 11i. So a number of people on the call today are still running 11i, and especially on the internet. And there's one significant change that Oracle made with the release of R12 is they got rid of modpl SQL. And if you look at the exact center of the screen, you'll see a box there that's modpl SQL. Modpl SQL is especially problematic because what it does is it allows you to access a URL from the client, which connects to the application server, and the code does not run on the application server. The code is actually database packages on the database. So at that point, I'm actually running a database package that generates a web page, and then that web page is just passed back through the application server to the client. So if there's any SQL injection vulnerabilities or other vulnerabilities in that package, I'm now actually executing code in the database, not just a SQL statement. I'm actually running database PL SQL packages. Another significant issue with the 11i platform is very old. So if you're still running 11i, a lot of the versions within the 11i component stack are exceptionally old. So these are all the dates. So when we start talking about the Oracle application server for 11i only, if you have upgraded to R12, this has been upgraded along the way. But if you're just running 11i, there's no way to upgrade the Oracle application server. So you're working with an application server that was released in December 2001. The Apache version is very old. There's no way now to upgrade the Apache. You're stuck at what Oracle has provided you. And again, this version was released in February 2001. The JServe is the Java container. Again, June 2000. Mod security version, which they actually give you a little bit of a security feature. But again, this is a very old version. It's over 12 years old, July 2004. The network encryption components used by default, unless specifically applied patches in the last year, is from September 2000. Oracle does not upgrade these. They're expecting you to upgrade the application, so they're not upgrading these technology components. The one thing they are doing is actually applying some security patches. So some of these components have been patched, but have not ever been upgraded. So especially in the Apache, so what Oracle does is actually backports the Apache security bugs to these versions and applies them. But again, you look at this technology stack, it's exceptionally old. So you're talking about 10, 15-year-old versions of different components here that are very critical to the application server functionality. So that was just a brief overview talking about some of the significant issues, why this is so problematic to deploy to the internet. So now let's talk about how Oracle is fixing this and what are some of the issues around that. So Oracle has a very distinct DMZ configuration documents. So they have come up with over the years a very specific way and very detailed configuration on how to protect Oracle E-Business Suite on the internet. And these are the numbers here. So there's, for each major version, there's actually a separate document. The key here is all steps must be followed in these documents. So where we find a significant problem here is there's a number of steps. There's 15 to 20 steps in each of these documents. Some of them are somewhat difficult to do. It takes some time to actually get it right, and people are not following every step. And second part, and we'll talk about this in a second, it's not obvious which steps you need to use. So what the DMZ document's trying to do? Fundamentally, they're trying to reduce the surface area of the application. So if I just pop on the application server on the internet, I've got 20,000 web pages. I've got Oracle Student System, Manufacturing, HR, all those things running. If I'm just running a module like iSupplier, which fundamentally 4 web pages that I need plus a couple login pages and maybe the online help, maybe I'm talking about 25 web pages, but not much more. I don't need to be running 20,000 web pages. So that Oracle's DMZ configuration is trying to limit that surface area. So they've got 2 components in here, one called the URL firewall, which reduces the number of overall pages available, and then also node trust level. So node trust level works with the OA framework, which is Oracle's specific web page framework for the Oracle E-Business Suite. So these documents walk you through a process in order to implement this. It's about 20 plus steps to actually try to reduce the surface area. A second part of the DMZ configuration is what modules are certified. So Oracle has actually spent some extra time and some additional work on these modules to make sure that they're a little bit more hardened, a little bit better than all the other 250 modules. So they spend some time, and we actually, Integrigy works with a lot of clients, and we actually penetration test a lot of these modules that are deployed to the internet. So these are the modules typically that have been beat up pretty well, either by Oracle themselves or by security professionals. But again, a lot of times we're finding even new vulnerabilities, old vulnerabilities have been around 15, 20 years in these modules. So again, they aren't completely fixed, they aren't completely been beat up, but they're better than the other modules. So if it's not on this list, you should not be deploying it to the internet. So one of the first mistakes we see is organizations saying, oh, why don't we just deploy that? How about Configurator or Oracle Student System just on the internet, things like that. Again, if it's not on the list, Oracle has not spent the time and effort to make sure that these are very well secured modules, that it's been thought out. Again, there's 250 modules. And so they just not been able to spend the time over the years to actually make sure everyone is absolutely secure, that there's no security vulnerabilities in these. So if it's not on the list, it should not be deployed to the internet. Another piece is we talked about the URL firewall. I'll go into great detail on that, but only for these modules do you get out of the box URL firewall rules from Oracle. So if you're deploying other modules, there's no rules by default for those modules in the URL firewall. So you then have to develop those rules yourself. So Oracle's EBS DMZ architecture is also very specific from a pure architectural standpoint. Fortunately, it's a very standardized architecture. So if you talk to any security professional, having a few layers of firewalls, using a reverse proxy or a load balancer in front of the application server are all highly recommended. And using SSL for encryption, just like when you connect to your bank, that's an encrypted connection. All people coming into your external site, and we would say also all your internal users, should be using SSL, so that network traffic is encrypted across the network. Then that connects through a firewall, and so hopefully you're now limiting just to that single port on the reverse proxy server. And the reverse proxy can be a reverse proxy or a load balancer. The tool we most see from our clients are the F5 big IP appliance. A lot of organizations also use Apache tools like Blue Coat. And then there's potentially maybe another firewall that then blocks access between the reverse proxy and the EBS application server. Many organizations don't have that. We would consider that maybe optional. And then you have another firewall that connects between the application server and the Oracle E-Business Suite database server. And that would only then allow the SQLnet connection between those two. So if you do compromise the EBS external application server, I can now access the database server, but I probably can't just connect everything else on your network. In this case, I would then try to connect to the database server and try to do some things in there. But again, we're putting in at least some layers of defense here to block things. And this is recommended Oracle E-Business Suite architecture, and pretty well defined. If you have any sort of DMZ applications today, this typically fits in pretty well into it. And most people do implement this type of architecture, so we don't see a lot of mistakes, or we may see a couple of ports open that shouldn't be, but generally people do this correctly. So the first key feature is when you're deploying to the internet is you need to enable the URL firewall. And the first huge mistake we see is the URL firewall is an appendix in the DMZ documents. So it's not obvious that this has to be deployed. But this is your first line of defense, trying to limit the architecture to go from the 20,000 pages down to just a few, and the URL firewall provides that protection. It does not provide protection for the OA framework. It allows all OA framework pages because those are actually just 2 pages, OA JSP and RF JSP, and then it dynamically calls different pages behind the scenes. The URL firewall can't block that. That's why you need another layer of protection we'll talk about in a minute. And the URL firewall is simply a whitelist of JSPs and servlets. So just think about it URL. So when I access a URL, all the URL firewall is doing is giving me that list of URLs that I'm allowed to access. And Oracle provides you this out of the box, but it must be configured. So actually I will jump out here for a second and we'll actually show you a real live URL firewall.com file. So when you install Oracle Business Suite, you get the URL firewall configuration template file. This will then be in the Apache conf directory, and then you'll actually have to edit it to make any changes. And so this just line by line allowing or disallowing different files. So in this case, this is a rewrite rule, and so it says if it is the app's login page, allow it. In this place, it's commented out. So in this configuration, we were not even allowing the login page. ircvisitor.jsp is the login page for iRecruitment. If you're not using iRecruitment, again, this should be commented out. And there's a couple sections in here. So the first section is the standard rewrite rules. So in this case, these are fundamentally just the standard Oracle eBusiness Suite technology stack pages, the AOL pages. I've got the login page. I've got my OA framework page. As you can see here, OA JSP and RF JSP should almost always be allowed. I can do some downloads. I get the error pages, log in, log out, those type of things. One mistake we often see here is these are also regular expressions. So what happens, someone will put in an incorrect regular expression and will actually allow all JSP pages or something. We actually see that occasionally, not too often, fortunately, but they'll actually put a universal rule. Oh, we can't make it work, so the DBA is trying to fiddle with this, and he just puts in a rule that allows all JSP pages. Again, you have to be very specific and very calculating on how this file is set up. And then you go down and you pick different modules. So if I'm running iRecruitment, I would actually then allow these pages. So fundamentally, this is just going through and limiting what pages are allowed. And it's just a very simple whitelist. But again, prone to errors. We often see people adding either too many pages or they might add a rule that's wide open. So this is very error prone because it's just line by line. And Oracle actually has a few mistakes in here. If you go down, you'll actually see there's a couple sections that are uncommented by default. So as you see here, service contracts, this is a mistake by Oracle, who we have an open security vulnerability with, and they still haven't fixed, that they just happen to allow these 2 service contract pages by default in the template. So this is one change that you need to be making. You need to be commenting these out. So to actually fix this, you would just go through and put 2 pound signs in front of them. So again, even Oracle is making mistakes giving you the template file. So this is the URL firewall. There is another piece to the URL firewall file. If you are now running web services, Oracle provides a web services URL firewall file. So there are 2 here. So you do have to be very careful when you're starting to run web services. And this file is automatically generated. So the first one is urlfw.conf. This is urlfw_ws.conf. And this file basically allows access to different web services, and you run the generate service web file here, and this will allow this file to be generated automatically for your enabled web services. What we often see, again, this is now another mistake, is DBAs trying to make things work enable things way too often. They add in way too much functionality because, oh, I don't know what they need, I don't know what they want to do, so they actually just turn on a lot of different things. This is an example of a file from a client that we looked at, and when we started looking at it, they needed 2 web services. They were basically running these 2 web services, and we all of a sudden were like, okay, you've told us you're running those 2 web services. Why is this configuration file, let's jump down to the end, almost 2,000 lines long? And so again, a big mistake here is because when they just ran this generation file, the DBA didn't know enough to say, okay, this doesn't quite make sense. Why did Oracle pick up all these files? So now these web services were all enabled on the internet. Fortunately, many of them require authentication, but there actually are a couple issues in here that I can actually pull back information that I should not be allowed to access by calling some of these web services. So again, you can see how quickly it is and easy it is to make a mistake in this configuration. So that's the URL firewall files. So again, the URL firewall is trying to block access to a large number of pages. It does nothing for the OA framework, but it's trying to block all these server pages, which there's 8,000 by default in release 12. And if I'm just running a module like iSupplier, I can get this down to like 4 to 20 pages. But you do have to be very careful about how this is enabled and how it works. Second piece of the DMZ configuration is responsibilities. So OA framework is just 2 web pages, so I can't block it using the URL firewall, so Oracle had to come up with another method to do that. So they actually set something called node trust level. And the first step of node trust level is I have to define the application server as external. And if I miss that step for some reason, node trust level just doesn't work. It doesn't do anything. It only will work if a server is enabled as external. So if you go through the DMZ configuration document, step 5.2 walks you through that process to do that. And then the next step is 5.3. You actually define the responsibilities that are allowed to access the OA framework pages. So now this works with the responsibility. So when someone's logged in, they have a certain responsibility, and that responsibility is allowed different functions, which are defined in the F&D form functions table. And only those OA framework web pages then can be accessed. If I try to access the page outside of that, I'm not allowed to actually access the page. So there's actually 2 different checks. One says if I'm in an external server, I'm not allowed to pick certain responsibilities. And there's actually a second check behind the scenes that says if that form function is in one of the responsibilities, it's allowed, otherwise it's not allowed. There are a number of issues with this though, because there's generic pages and guest pages that are all allowed by default. So this is not a perfect solution. It does, again, reduce it from 10 to 12,000 different web pages down to a few hundred based on the responsibilities. But again, it's a manual configuration. I got to go through now, start adding in the responsibilities. A significant mistake we see here, people add too many responsibilities and they start adding system administrator and all these other things that aren't needed externally. I should be, if I'm running iSupplier, I should just have a couple iSupplier things. So if we put these 2 features together, now again, the goal here is to reduce the surface area of the application. If there's a web page that has a vulnerability, if I can't get to it, I can't exploit it. And that's the key goal here. So when we talk about the DMZ configuration, what are a few of the key mistakes? One is the URL firewall is not enabled, or it's enabled incorrectly. So the key here is I have to enable it. The major reason we see it not enabled is it's an appendix. It's an appendix E. Nowhere in the DMZ document does it say you need to enable it. So if we pop out, I'll bring up one of the documents here. So this is the document for the R12 in the DMZ configuration. And if we look through the table of contents, we go through, it talks about how to do all this, very detailed steps, how to enable the node trust level, responsibilities, and before this talks about generic architecture, blah, 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 blah. Unfortunately, the URL firewall, which we consider the key part of the DMZ configuration, is actually listed down here as an appendix. This is not in the list of major steps to do for the deployment. And there is no commentary up here to say, oh, by the way, you need to enable the URL firewall. So that's one of the key reasons we see that the URL firewall is not enabled for many organizations. And if you are on the internet and you don't have the URL firewall, that is a significant security issue. And you are running many pages are accessible, and there are many vulnerabilities in those pages that can be exploited. So that is the key thing that you need to be looking at and making sure it's done. A second risk we see is that DMZ server is not marked as external. This all works based on if you mark the DMZ server as external. And as part of the standard DMZ architecture, Oracle does not allow you to mix internal and external servers. A lot of organizations, especially smaller ones who have maybe just one application server, say, oh, why don't we just use it internally and externally? Oracle's DMZ architecture does not work if you use both the same server for internal and external. So you must use a dedicated server, and that dedicated external application server must be marked as external in the application, and it's basically a profile option at the server level. The third issue here is no trust level includes way too many responsibilities. When we do our security assessments, one of the things we always pull up is looking at the no trust level responsibilities. And if you're running iSupplier, you should maybe see 2 or 3 responsibilities. If you're running something like iStore, you may have 4 or 5. But we often see 20, 30 responsibilities. People are trying to make things work. They may have added system administrator in there. There often are way too many responsibilities. So one of the things that if you want to audit and look at the EBS suite configuration for the DMZ, look at which responsibilities are enabled. Finally, for the basic web application configuration, FND Diagnostics is a system profile option, and often that is enabled. And FND Diagnostics should always be disabled at the site level, and if you do need it for specific users, it should be only enabled for individual users. And what FND Diagnostics does, I'll jump out to an Oracle Business Suite environment here real quick. If you see the Oracle Business Suite page, I'll blow this up so everyone can see it a little bit better. This is the standard login page for an R12 environment. And you'll see down in the lower left corner, About This Page. And now if I click on About This Page, I can now get into the diagnostics behind the scenes for Oracle Business Suite. And a little trick here, this actually now logged me in as a guest user. So I have it now an application session. Now I can start going through and looking at your technology components. I can see that this is a 12.1.1 environment, that you're running Java 1.6, you're running 12.203 of the database. Oop, that's not supported, that's a little bit behind. I can now start seeing all your profile options. I can see all your patches applied, so now I can actually go very easy check. FND Diagnostics is often enabled. Somebody's having a problem, so they just enable at the site level and they forget to turn it on. In our audits, about 20 to 30% of the environments we look at have FND Diagnostics enabled. There are many hidden features that are enabled by FND Diagnostics. So there's a number of security vulnerabilities around the issue of FND Diagnostics is enabled. Oracle will not patch these security vulnerabilities because part of the documentation says FND Diagnostics should not be enabled in a production environment, therefore it's not a security vulnerability. But if FND Diagnostics is enabled, there are a number of security issues that I can exploit that if it's disabled, I cannot. So again, that's kind of a medium risk item that, and always check. So if you ever see that About This Page is enabled, definitely talk to the DBA and send them a message that needs to be disabled. Whenever Oracle Business Suite is deployed to the internet. So even if you have development and test on the internet, which we do not recommend, often FND Diagnostics is enabled there. So one of my goals is not to exploit your environment. My goal is to get a foothold in your environment, and FND Diagnostics, some of the vulnerabilities allow me to do that. So that's basic DMZ configuration. So how do you limit the number of web pages down to a reasonable number so there's not security vulnerabilities in those web pages? The next issue is how to actually fix these security vulnerabilities. And Oracle, on a quarterly basis, releases security patches for all its products, including Oracle Business Suite and the database and the application server in the form of critical patch updates. For Oracle Business Suite, in the last 10 plus years, there's been 581 security vulnerabilities fixed in just the Oracle Business Suite. That is a massive number of security vulnerabilities. So if you are not regularly applying security patches, there's significant risk to the environment. So now we start to break those out over time. What type of vulnerabilities are those? The most critical one, if you want to be kept up at night thinking about how bad the Oracle Business Suite environment is on the internet, what the risk is, SQL injection vulnerabilities are exceptionally problematic. These allow me to fundamentally add a piece of code to a parameter that will then get executed behind in the database as the apps user. As you can think, that is a huge, huge issue. Cross-scripting issues are also problematic, not as much as SQL injection. We rank SQL injection as critical. Maybe you can say cross-site scripting would be a medium vulnerability. And then there's a lot of other vulnerabilities. As you notice, these numbers don't add up to 581. There's lots of different scenarios, authorization, authentication bugs, where I can potentially access web pages that one of the programmers just forgot to put in the check for if you're authorized to access this web page. Tons of business logic issues. And again, there's many other categories of issues within the Oracle Business Suite. But as you can see, these are very high-risk vulnerabilities. The mistake people make is they're not applying these patches, and some of the reasons for that is they get behind in terms of version upgrades. The DBA cannot apply security patches if the business says, oh, we can't upgrade the application for a while, either because of time, money, or effort. Oracle Business Suite 12.1 and 12.2 are really the only mainstream supported versions. So if you are not on one of those two versions, there's most likely you're not applying security patches. 12.0 CPU support ended January 2015. 11.5.10 for mainstream support ended January 2016, unless you've purchased a Tier 1 advanced support contract, which is a significant amount of additional money, then you're actually supported for security patches through 2017. But again, a lot of organizations are starting to fall farther and farther behind, especially in terms of versions, and applying security patches is not feasible if you're on an older version in this case. A second issue why we're seeing security patches not being applied is actually the extended support requirements for different databases and the CPU support requirements. So even for 12.2, if you've upgraded to that in the last couple of years, you may not be on 12.2.3, and the CPU patches are requiring these basic versions. So for 12.2, you have to be on 12.2.3 with a specific AD level. 12.1 is you have to be on 12.1.3. You also have to be on application server 10.1.3.5. If you're still doing 10.5.10 or 11.5.10, you need to be on RUP 6 or 7. So again, you have to be upgrading all the technology stack components as well as the application on a regular basis, generally every 18 months, in order to get the security patches. So why are security patches and bugs so critical to the Oracle Business Suite is because there's just so many of them. And there's a lot of different organizations who are looking very closely at Oracle Business Suite and finding these bugs, reporting them to Oracle, publishing the results on the internet. In the last couple of quarters have been a large number. So in January of 2016, 78 bugs were fixed. And in January of this year, just a couple of weeks ago, 120 different security bugs were fixed by Oracle. These are massive, massive numbers. As you can see, the numbers are increasing, not going down. So, and quite often, this information is published out. So an attacker who can get to your Oracle Business Suite environment on the internet, and it's actually easier to find than you think, can actually exploit these bugs. So when we work with our clients, we actually go through and spend a lot of time trying to isolate where are the risks and threats in their environment. Are they running internally only? Are they running externally? And then we break it out as, is it an authenticated user or an unauthenticated user? In this case, we're mostly concerned about unauthenticated users on the internet. So this is just everybody, some hacker in Romania who can get to the URL of your environment. So you may be running iSupplier, iRecruitment, iStore. The unauthenticated users who are just hackers out on the internet, there's 7 billion people on the planet. How many people can connect to the internet and connect to your environment and with hostile actions? So we're mostly concerned here about both authenticated and unauthenticated, but mostly unauthenticated users. That's kind of what should be keeping you up at night. What somebody with no business reason trying to connect to your iSupplier, your iStore, and trying to hack in, trying to compromise the entire environment, steal data, especially if you're maybe running an HR environment inside your Oracle Business Suite. I've got a lot of social security numbers. I've got a lot of valuable data that they may want. So this is a sample from a client. So the client was behind on CPU. So the last CPU they had applied was July 2015. I believe this is a 12.1.3 environment. So now we started talking about, okay, you are behind. How many of these specific security vulnerabilities in your modules, I believe they were running iStore and iSupplier, how many of these specific modules could I actually access out of that several hundred security vulnerabilities, what was actually accessible in their environment, even if they're running the URL firewall. So I may be running the URL firewall, I may have reduced that surface area still, but I still have some exposure. And we identified 42 of the security bugs that were unpatched. And again, in this case, there's about 200 security bugs that were unpatched, but in this specific environment, still 42 were exploitable, even though they had done their DMZ configuration correctly, and 19 of the 42 we rated as very high risk. If I had logged in, additional 14 security bugs could be exploited. And then on their internal network, because there's no restrictions on the internal network, I can access, there's no URL firewall prior to 12.2 internally, there's 197 bugs that could be exploited by an unauthenticated user, and an additional 35 if I was authenticated in the application. So again, these are very high numbers. So even if you're thinking, oh, there's not that many bugs, this is a classic case. So if I'm a little bit over a year and a half behind my CPU patches, I'm now starting to talk about 19 very critical security bugs in my application, that many of those are SQL injection. So this is very high risk. This is, people do not recognize the potential damage that someone can cause. The biggest one that should be keeping you up at night is SQL injection. So what SQL injection vulnerability is somebody's just connecting to your external application server, they're typing in a URL, and if there's a flaw in a certain web pages, I can now add in a fragment of SQL. And the red here will get executed as the apps user in the database. In this case, all I'm doing is calling the FND user package, update user. I'm actually changing the sysadmin password. That's all it takes. So I just need to use one of these security vulnerabilities to do this, and that's how powerful these are. I'm not even talking about maybe just adding a union on a specific query that's bringing back data and actually dumping out the P or all people F table, which has social security numbers. So there's many different capabilities here, because these are being executed as the apps user. And even if I'm running iSupplier and the SQL injection vulnerability in iSupplier, I can access HR data, I can access bank account information, I can access anything I want. The key is there has to be a vulnerability, but there are vulnerabilities. They're getting patched all the time, and people know about them, and some get published on the internet. So this is the risk here. So the major mistake here is not applying the security patches routinely. And the couple of big struggles why people don't apply these. One is they're not supported. They're gotten behind on security patches in general and upgrades in general. So they can't apply security patches until they do a major upgrade. And two, these security patches are cumulative and for all parts of the application. So I cannot just apply a security patch today for iSupplier on the internet. When I apply the security patch, I'm actually getting some GL fixes, AP fixes, some HR fixes. I'm getting fixes in many different modules because the patches are cumulative and comprehensive. There is no single patch. If there's just a high-risk vulnerability in iSupplier, there is no patch. You have to apply the entire thing, which may cover any of the 250 modules. And again, these are all very high risk. Many of them, even if you do the DMZ configuration and do the URL firewall node trust level, these are still fully exploitable. A lot of our clients say, oh, but we have a major web application firewall, we've got all our security tools, we've got intrusion prevention. Unfortunately, none of the mainstream commercial products today know anything about Oracle E-Business Suite. They may be able to block a cross-site scripting attack. They may be able to pick up a SQL injection attack, but the SQL injection example I just showed you before, no major tool would actually pick that up. They'll pick up if I try to potentially add a union, those type of things. So you really need a EBS-specific security tool to block these known vulnerabilities and zero-day security vulnerabilities. One such tool is our tool, Integrigy's AppDefend, which has a rule for every single published Oracle E-Business Suite security vulnerability, then also provides generic E-Business Suite security protection against things like SQL injection and cross-site scripting. So again, the security patches are very critical. You need to be maintaining these, even if you're doing everything else right. Even if you have layers of defense, these are very critical, and you need to be applying the patches. And if you can't apply the patches, you need to be adding something else in, such as a product like AppDefend. So that's to an overview of the critical patch dates and the security vulnerabilities. The final topic here is network encryption. So Oracle E-Business Suite supports network encryption out of the box. So this is SSL, just as you're logging into your bank and you see in your browser a little padlock. This is the encryption across the internet. So the key is if you do use something like iStore and people are putting in credit card numbers, that needs to be encrypted. If you have HR self-service on the internet, people are maybe seeing social security numbers, that information needs to be encrypted. We highly recommend almost always for every DMZ configuration that SSL is enabled. Oracle E-Business Suite supports native SSL TLS encryption. I see the term TLS here. SSL was the initial version, so there's SSL version 2, version 3 were the major versions. That has been replaced with TLS, and there's TLS versions 1.0, 1.1, and 1.2. It's very key that Oracle E-Business Suite only recently added support for TLS 1.1 and 1.2. And so those are really the two versions you should be running. If you walked over to your chief security officer or someone in your security team and said, what should I be running for SSL support? And the only thing we can support is SSL version 3, they would say, no, you must be running TLS 1.1, 1.2, because there are some vulnerabilities and weaknesses in the previous encryption algorithms. These are the MetaLink notes here. A very key point here is that there are new versions of these documents as of July 2016. So if you look out on the internet and look for an SSL configuration document or just go search in MetaLink, 2 different documents will show up. So you need to make sure you get the right version of the document, because the July 2016 versions, which I've highlighted here, tell you how to actually enable the TLS 1.1 and 1.2 support. Key point is that 11i does not support TLS 1.1 or 1.2. So do I really need to encrypt this network traffic? We get this question all the time, especially from DBAs. Security professionals know it right away, but a lot of DBAs and Oracle developers and things, why do we need to encrypt it? So if I just go to the sign-on page, this is a dump of the actual request that goes across the internet. It's all in clear text. And oh, by the way, if I put in my username and password, that's in clear text. If I have credit card numbers flowing back and forth, security numbers flowing back and forth, if someone can somehow intercept this information, let's say I'm just sitting at a Starbucks and I can kind of compromise the Starbucks router and things, I can now start seeing this information just in clear text flowing across the internet. So the key here is anything, especially externally enabled e-business suite environments, should always be using SSL. We also strongly recommend using this internally also. There's 2 ways to actually do SSL encryption with Oracle E-Business Suite. You can use a external device, such as your load balancer, your reverse proxy, to do the SSL encryption, or you can do it natively within the application. So if it's in the application, the encryption and decryption actually happens on the application server. Or you can do it within the load balancer or the reverse proxy. The huge advantage of doing it in the load balancer or reverse proxy is typically those devices have dedicated SSL encryption hardware. So they'll actually do it on the chip versus doing it in software, which is a lot slower. So what are some of the common mistakes here? Integrigy recommends very strongly that you do not use the native EBS encryption, that you do not do the encryption decryption of SSL on the application server. You should be doing that within a dedicated appliance such as a reverse proxy or a load balancer. And there's a number of reasons for this. The main point is that the reverse proxy or load balancer, and when we talk about load balancers, something like an F5 big IP appliance, those devices are frequently updated. So if there is change, if there's newer protocols, if there's newer encryption ciphers, those type of things, and there often are, that is changing quite often. Every couple of years, a new version of TLS will come out. New support for hashing algorithms such as SHA-2 has come out recently. Those will support it. EBS Business Suite tends to be fairly far behind in support. Only in July 2016, maybe 4 or 5 years after the newest versions of TLS were released, did Oracle actually support it in the E-Business Suite. So that's why moving this off to a dedicated piece of hardware is very important. That also dedicated piece of hardware often is maintained by the network administrators for many, many different applications. So right now you can either have your DBA do it, who does it just for the Business Suite application server, and SSL is complex. You have to do certificates, you have to pass back certificates. There's lots of different, very nuanced points to how you configure this. So would you rather have your DBA doing that, or a network administrator who hopefully is doing this for many, many different applications, who has a very strong background? It may be actually even done by the security team. So our recommendation is to do this on the device like the load balancer, because both people and technology have much better support for doing SSL encryption, especially around the certificates. It's just a nightmare when you have to actually work with that. For anybody on the call who's done that, probably understand. Yeah, you don't have to do it very often, but when you have to do it, it just takes a lot of different steps, and it's very detail oriented. So if you do actually do the native SSL encryption, there are a couple issues there. First, Oracle support out of the box for eBusiness Suite is fairly old. So in order to support the newest encryption standards, TLS 1.1 and 1.2, Oracle released that support for 12.1, 12.2 in July of 2016. So you do have to apply a bunch of patches, make sure the application server has actually been upgraded, and in order to get that configured. So the common mistake we see is people just don't update it. They're still running fairly old protocols such as SSL version 3. The second issue is the out-of-the-box support for Oracle Business Suite actually has a lot of these older, weak, broken protocols and ciphers actually enabled by default. So we see many organizations, especially running 11i, who have SSL version 2, SSL version 3 still enabled. And if you actually told your security team, oh yeah, we're just running SSL version 2 at version 3, we haven't done anything with TLS 1.0 yet, they would probably fall off their chairs and like, what are you talking about? That's unacceptable. So the key here is there is some manual steps. If you go through the SSL documents, they'll actually tell you on how to disable these, but they are enabled by default. So if you just follow the standard document and enable them, there is no step in there to try to disable the weak ones. Those are actually in appendices and some other meta link notes. So it's very important that this is configured correctly. So let's overview some of the common mistakes that we often see when deploying to the Oracle Business Suite to the internet. Because we found so many problems with this over the years, and that Oracle back in 2005, 2006 timeframe did not have a solution, in Integrigy, we actually developed a product specifically to help our clients protect themselves on the internet. So the Integrigy AppDefend Enterprise Application Firewall is designed solely and optimized for Oracle Business Suite. So this is a specific layer that protects against many of the mistakes we've just talked about, many of the misconfigurations, and many of the weaknesses within Oracle Business Suite. So the first key feature of AppDefend is it protects against these known security vulnerabilities. So every single CPU that comes out, we provide a rule for every single Oracle Business Suite security vulnerability, and we also provide a generic layer of protection against SQL injection and cross-site scripting, because we know not all bugs are patched and that there are unknown and unfound SQL injection and cross-site scripting bugs within Oracle Business Suite, so we provide a layer of generic protection. Then the second key feature is, since Oracle Business Suite URL firewall configuration is very difficult to do, you have to get the responsibilities right if you do no trust level in addition, we decided to do a little bit different approach to that and actually have a much more flexible and automated solution to limit the number of modules. So AppDefend, you just do one configuration. If you're running iSupplier, you just actually configure AppDefend with ISP, which is the code for iSupplier, and AppDefend will actually do the work for you to know what pages are supposed to be enabled and disabled. And then we also provide mobile and web services protection. We see a lot more of our clients now moving into the web services space, and massive problems there because the DBAs just don't understand web services. And what is the DBA going to do if they don't understand something? They're just going to enable everything to make it work, right? The developers are beating up on them, the business is beating up on the DBA. They're struggling with it because the documentation is not very good. There's multiple ways to do different things. So what's the first thing they do? I just turn on every web service, I enable every web service, and then when we kind of deploy it out in production, oh, by the way, it gets deployed to production too. and also to the internet. So AppDefend provides a level of protection for web services in addition. The incredible feature for AppDefend is it actually is not a separate appliance. It's not a separate standalone server. It actually runs as part of Oracle Business Suite. So it runs as a servlet filter within this application stack. So it sees everything going on in the application. So even if an error message isn't returned, AppDefend actually sees that SQL errors are occurring for a web session, who's actually logged in per the application, not just trying to track on who's using a login page, but actually who the application thinks is logged in. So it's a very capable and feature-rich product. So if you are struggling, or if you just even have Oracle Business Suite on the internet and want an additional layer of protection, which we think is almost critical and mandatory because there's a lot of flaws still in Oracle Business Suite. So unless you're applying security patches immediately and you're spending a lot of time trying to make sure that the application is locked down and configured appropriately on the internet, AppDefend can help automate a lot of that. It's a very simple install. We call it the 15-minute install to get it up and running and provide a robust layer of protection for the application. So I'll open it up to any questions. So that was a very high-level overview of some of the major mistakes that we see, especially from our security assessments of clients. So we do a lot of penetration tests each year of Oracle Business Suite environments on the internet, and we see many of these issues when we do those security assessments. So I'll turn it back to Phil to see if there's any questions.
Thanks, Steve. Good presentation. Got a couple of questions here. Our first one, our development team would like to expose some web services to external partners. What safety issues are there?
The key point on the web services is to be very carefully make sure that only externally enabled ones should be externally enabled. So you can actually go click a little box and actually enable a lot. And then if you do run the web services URL firewall configuration, it'll actually put those out there. So you need to make sure that only what you want externally is done. And then when you run that program to generate the URL firewall file, that you know exactly what is going out there. We often see way too many web services being deployed externally.
Next question. Management wants external access to self-service HR for 100,000 employees, it looks like. But IT security is pushing back. Is it a good idea?
Yes, but you do have to go into it with your eyes wide open, very much understand the risks here, especially if you're not applying security patches. We would strongly recommend you'd use a product like AppDefend to provide that additional layer. But first, make sure the DMZ is configured right. You have to stay up to date on the security patches. And then if you can't do either of those or you want the additional layer of protection, AppDefend provides a very robust solution for that.
Next question. When applying CPUs to eBusiness Suite, is it better to apply the CPU to your internal EBS and then clone to the external tier, or should you patch each tier separately?
I don't know if it matters in terms of, we see a lot of shared appletops, and when we see shared appletops, often there's an internal shared appletop and an external shared appletop. So from the perspective of the question, I don't know if it necessarily matters. That as long as it gets patched is really what we're concerned about. We have not seen any issues about applying patches in any specific order to any of the tiers. We would probably bring down the external tier and apply it there first. But typically we don't see a lot of problems with those patches. Sometimes there's some functional issues, but in general the patches for the business suite go in pretty well at this point.
All right. Next question. What would keep you up at night deploying iSupplier? You may talk all day about that one.
Yeah. Again, when you're deploying Oracle Business Suite to the internet, it's problematic. This is a very large application with many different web pages. So do not underestimate the level of effort is required to secure it on the initial deployment and also keep it secure. And keeping it secure involves a couple different areas. One is applying the security patches, but things like, I can't tell you how many times we find the FND diagnostics enabled, where we start talking to the DBAs and like, oh, how did that get enabled? What's happening there? Customizations are also an issue. We do a lot of customization security reviews, and we find a lot of SQL injection, other major vulnerabilities within the customization, especially GSP pages. As an example, why there's so many security vulnerabilities in Oracle Business Suite, especially around GSP pages, and the ModPL SQL pages were also had many security vulnerabilities, is that things like authorization and authentication were hard-coded in the page by the developer. So if the developer didn't do that right or forgot it, and in many cases they said, oh, no one could access that directly, they would have to go through some other page, which is not true. A lot of security vulnerabilities are simply around, if I just type in a URL and I know the name of the page, and it's a package application, everybody knows and can figure out the names of every page, I can access the page and there would be no authentication in the page because the programmer had to put in some code on every single page to make sure it was authenticated. That's why OA framework is a little bit better, because the authentication for OA framework pages happens at a central point. That is not true for JSP pages. So this is some of the reasons why you need to really spend a lot of time and make sure this is secure. Make sure that the DMZ configuration is done right, the URL firewall is installed, security patches are done right, you're checking that it's hardened. Another issue we see quite often is their seeded application accounts. So accounts like OPSadmin, that a lot of people forget to change the passwords or disable those accounts. Just the basic secure configuration guide from Oracle, some of those hardening. And then we strongly recommend you put another layer in that would protect against a lot of those issues, especially if someone enables F&D diagnostics. AppDefend has a rule for that, and we'll actually disable that out of the box. So there's some of the things that you can do. But again, this is not a robust, well-secured application. It is, by default, grossly unsecure, and you need to spend the time and effort to make sure it's secured, and also spend the time and effort moving forward to make sure it stays secure. And I cannot underestimate the moving forward part. We'll go through and do a security assessment, work with the client, get it secured, goes to the internet. We'll come back 2 years later and find multiple holes because they've added some customizations, they've turned on F&D diagnostics, they're not applying security patches. That often happens quite often.
Well, I think that's the end of the questions for the day's session. I want to thank everybody for attending this afternoon. And also remind everybody that on March 9th will be our next presentation, and in April, first week in April, we'll be at Collaborative 17 out in Las Vegas, and we've got sessions going on, I think, practically every day out there on different topics, including covering EBS, Oracle EBS, and also PeopleSoft. So be sure to stay tuned, and if you're going to be in Collaborative 17, please stop by and see us. Again, thanks everybody. Have a great rest of the week.